First, many Russians think Alaska is actually theirs, and I'm not joking about that. The Russian-born now soldier for Ukraine and founder of the European Resilience Initiative, Sergei Semleny, wrote on Twitter this week, "I was taught in geography class in the 1990s that Russia has never sold Alaska to the U.S. but leased it for 100 years, that the U.S. had later forged the contract and broken the original one, that Alaska is Russian." Now, the 100-year lease would have been up, according to that, in 1967, because it was 1867 when Lincoln's Secretary of State William Seward brokered a deal to buy Alaska from Russia. It's often called Seward's Folly as a joke because Alaska was and still is in a lot of places so desolate. But it also, in 1967, would have been just 8 years after Alaska formally became a state. There's also a belief among many Russians that the contract that the U.S. signed with Russia was somehow voided in the 1920s because of a claim that Russian Orthodox schools and churches were forced to close by the U.S. government after being told they could stay open, and then their leaders of those schools and churches were punished. None of that is true. And according to the University of Anchorage, the Russian community in that city and in the state remains vibrant and active. But that hasn't stopped Putin for the last several years from leaning into Alaskan Russian imagery, including using a photo of him for his birthday standing next to an Alaskan bear, recognizable to most Russians as the national animal, and the specific bear that Putin used was from the American Museum of Natural History in New York, making Putin look like he was leading this bear away, presumably back to Russia, and thus a sign of leading Alaska away from the U.S. and back to Russia. And there have also been billboards popping up around Russia that read, "Alaska is ours." And on Putin's official website, there are passages about how it was Russian settlers who first ventured into Alaska, claiming the territory, and then made their way as far south as California. And that's why there are Russian grapes in California vineyards. And if you look at how Putin talks about Ukraine and the rest of the former Soviet or Russian territory, he's making a lot of claims about heritage, that Russians were there first, which means the land is theirs. They have a right to it, obviously paying no attention to indigenous or first peoples in those places. But at least in a symbolic sense, Putin and many Russians think of Alaska as sort of this appendix of Russia. And following that logic, I guess maybe further south? I don't know.